tout le monde. I am calling this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 2, the House of Commons Standing Committee on National Defence. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, October 14th, 2020, the committee is meeting for a briefing on the work of Canada's Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security. With the committee's concurrence, I will reserve 15 minutes at the end of the session for committee business. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of September 23rd, 2020. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So, as you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for the meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For the members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. A reminding that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. And with regards to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our very best to maintain the order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Now, I would now like to welcome our witnesses. Merci beaucoup pour votre temps aujourd'hui. Je suis très...
Thank you for your time today, and I'm very pleased to have you all with us.
The Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Jackie O'Neill, Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security, and from the Department of National Defence, Brigadier General Lise Bourgon, Defense Champion, Women, Peace and Security. You can go ahead and je vous invite à vous pour adresser au comité. Merci.
I now invite you to address the committee.
Merci, Madam Chair, and to members of the committee for focusing on this issue. I care deeply about this topic, and perhaps as a reflection of that, submitted a somewhat lengthy written statement. But do not worry, ne vous inquiétez pas. I will keep my opening remarks here to well under the allotted time so that you can hear directly from Brigadier General Bourgon, and we can proceed quickly to questions and discussion. I want to highlight only a few things. D'abord, il est significatif que nous...
First of all, it's very important that we're meeting today because today marks the 20th anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, the foundation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. We have made a great deal of progress. There are now 10 Security Council resolutions. 85 countries have national plans, and most multilateral organizations have policies, including the African Union, NATO, and the OSCE.
Yet, progress on implementation has been inconsistent. For example, the representation of UN military women peacekeepers is only about 6%, and some within that remarkable group still experience unacceptable working conditions. And women around the world, for example in Afghanistan, are still fighting for direct representation in peace talks. What's more, much of the progress we have achieved is in peril. There are increasing attacks against defenders of the human rights of women and LGBTQ2S persons, and the pandemic, and particularly authoritarian responses to COVID-19, represent existential threats for many women peace builders and local organizations working at community level. Le Canada a fait preuve d'un engagement soutenu, regroupant plusieurs...
Canada has committed to achieving gender equality in this area. We have a parliament and civil society that play an active role. And we are now on our second action plan with the Canadian Forces and our CMP as partners. Of course, a great deal of work remains to improve. The Brigadier General and I are happy to have this opportunity to talk about the progress that we've made and where improvement is required. I received my mandate, my 3-year mandate, just over a year ago.
And I've been fortunate to work directly with many DND and CAF personnel in a range of ways. They're noted in my written submission, and they include contributing to Canadian initiatives of leadership, including the ELSI initiative for Women in Peace Operations, Women, Peace and Security Chief of Defense Staff Network, and more, strengthening implementation of Canada's own National Action Plan, supporting and engaging directly with CAF troops and operations on the ground, and connecting the wide variety of specialists working across our government on the gendered dimensions of issues such as child soldiers, cybersecurity, and veterans health, and more. To be sure, there is both excellent work underway and always a need to listen, to reflect humbly, and to improve. So I'll end by noting that it is particularly helpful to those of us working inside government when parliamentarians engage in sustaining the focus on women, peace, and security. It is helpful when you ask that data be disaggregated by gender, as well as other intersecting identities, including race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, and more. It's helpful when you review and interrogate the annual progress report submitted to Parliament. Helpful when you invite testimony from civil society representatives and academics. And it is particularly helpful when you ask every person who appears before committee about the results of the gender-based analysis plus assessment they undertook related to the issue being discussed. And I'll emphasize that especially on issues related to women and gender, it's meaningful to have not only women asking or being asked. I'm extremely proud to work with colleagues across D&D and the CAF and global affairs and beyond. Canada truly is setting a global standard on this work, and I thank you again for the opportunity to discuss it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Madame O'Neill. And now to General Bourgoin.
Madam Chair, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to appear alongside Mrs. Jacqueline Henry, Canadian Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security, and thank you for your interest in UNSCR 1325 and the WPS agenda. Plus de 33 ans ont passé depuis que
Over 33 years have passed since I began my career as an officer cadet at the Collège Militaire Royal in Saint-Jean. Since then, as an officer and as a helicopter pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force, I've witnessed many changes that have facilitated the integration of women into the Canadian Armed Forces. The United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 and the Women, Peace and Security Agenda have been key drivers of progress for the Government of Canada and the Canadian Armed Forces.
In my current role as Defense Champion for WPS, my interest is focused first and foremost on making the Canadian Armed Forces stronger and more effective in military operation. My role as champion is wide: to provide leadership, advice, and to support the Canadian Armed Forces effort in institutionalizing diversity as an operational capability and to promote diversity and inclusion as core institutional values. From a CAF D&D perspective, the WPS agenda is all-encompassing, complex, and interrelated in everything we do. It includes diversity and inclusion, recruitment and retention, training and professional military education, the integration of a gender perspective in domestic and expeditionary operation, research, and finally, cooperation amongst various departments and organizations, allies, civil societies, and NGOs. As mandated by the government, the foundation of our institutional and operational progress is through the use of a gender-based analysis plus, GBA plus, and everything the CAF does, such as policy, procurement, and operation. Nous avons fait des progrès significatifs.
We have made significant progress, but there is still some way to go. particularly with respect to the recruitment and retention of women in the Canadian Forces.
With 16.1% of women in the CAF today, it will be a challenge to reach our employment equity goal of 25.1% by 2026, especially as we continue to compete against traditional cultural identity and gender roles in Canadian society. To this effect, our Chief of Defense Staff, General Jonathan Vance, launched Operation Generation last year as an effort to recruit women and minority groups to the Canadian Armed Forces. This effort has already had noticeable impacts on the number of women and minority group recruited. At the same time, Military Personnel Command is working on many retention initiatives, from pay and benefits, terms of service, geographical stability, and support to our families, to name only a few. As a reflection of Canadian societies and values, we understand the strength and benefits that diversity and inclusion bring, both being essential to mission success, institutionally and on operation. Je vous remercie encore pour.
In closing, Madam Chair, thank you again for the invitation to be here today. I look forward to this morning's discussion and will be happy to answer any questions regarding the importance of women, peace and security agenda as it relates to Canadian Armed Forces operations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madame O'Neill and General Bourgon. I think we can turn firstly, I believe it's Madame Gallant has the first question.
Cheryl's muted.
Ms. Gallant, you're on mute.
Okay, there we go. I've unmuted it again. Is it coming through yet? Hello?
Yes, that's
All
excellent.
good.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. O'Neill, in your position mandate, you're allowed to provide advice to the Minister of National Defense. Were you consulted or did you provide any advice to the Minister on the deployment of the Canadian Armed Forces personnel that went to the long-term care facilities during the COVID pandemic in Ontario and Quebec?
Sorry, is everyone able to hear? Okay, sorry. I just said no, I did not. Thank you.
Okay. The healthcare profession in Canada is disproportionately staffed with female workers. Now, while this trend does not continue in the Canadian Armed Forces, there are certain professions in the military where female participation is significant. Are you aware if the women of the Canadian Armed Forces were disproportionately exposed to COVID-19 in the deployments to the long-term care facilities in Ontario and Quebec?
I don't have that data, sorry. I can't speak to it. Brigadier General Bourgon is raising her hand, though, so perhaps she can.
All right. General Bourgon?
Sorry, I was fighting with my, my mute button, of course. As you mentioned, of course, like 50% of the women in the military right now are in 6 occupations. So very support intense and also medical, as you pointed out. I don't have the actual numbers, but I have the percentage. When we're looking on operation, deployed on operation, normally on expeditionary forces, statistically, we're about 12% women that are deployed. Normally in domestic operations, such as hurricane reliefs in Canada, the stats are about 9% women. But during Operation Laser, which was the support to Quebec and Ontario, the stats, we had about 15% women. So because of the nature of the role that we were asked to do on the ground, which was, again, mostly medical, there was a slightly higher proportion of women on Op Laser.
Okay, so there were only 15% women. Now, the last parliament, this committee extensively studied the topic of women in the Canadian Armed Forces as well as Operation Honor. Now, as we've heard before committee, and it's been widely reported, Op Honor has made little progress towards its goal. Ms. O'Neill, what is your opinion of the reasons behind the lack of progress in Operation Honor?
So I'm not best placed to speak to the specifics of what exactly is working with respect to Op Honor and where the challenges still lie. What I will say is that clearly, to me, the strongest signal has come from senior leadership. And I've worked with armed forces, militaries around the world who've been trying to address this issue, usually not with the same level of coherence or stated determination. And I'll say that the signals and the message about the lack of tolerance and the desire for a coordinated approach has been quite significant from General Vance, from Minister Sajjan, and others. So while I won't be able to speak to the specifics of the implementation of the policy and again what specifically is working best and what is not, there are some key elements through Op Honor that are in place that I think are contributing to significant change over time.
And would the general please answer that question?
Well, I would reflect what Mrs. O'Neill just said. There's a lot of attention on Op Honor. We are working extremely hard at trying to have a solid policy, changing the culture in the CAF, supporting the victims. There's a lot of progress that has been done. Statistically, though, what we're saying is actually, in my opinion, is a good sign because it means that people are feeling comfortable going forward and saying what they're living. So although it might look negative, in a way it's a positive because people are coming forward, and that is more than half the battle. So we are working extremely hard, and every small step forward is huge victory, but we are getting there.
And Canada's National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security calls for the full implementation of Justice Deschamps' 10 recommendations on sexual assault in the military. Now, we had Justice Deschamps herself appear before the committee last year, and she stated that there's a disconnect between when she proposed or between what she proposed and exactly what is being implemented, specifically in regards to the organizations which handle the reporting of assaults to be outside the military and free from the chain of command. Does Canadian Armed Forces need a fully independent center of accountability for sexual assault and harassment to help make some of the actual progress towards improving the environment for women in our military? And that's for the ambassador, please.
So there are enormous amounts of components that go into this. And we've heard General Vance talk about this on several occasions, that there isn't one single step that will solve the problem. Whether or not that is implemented or required is a decision that needs to be made. What I will say is that there have been, one of the most impressive things I've seen is that there have been an effort on a range of fronts. So as you've talked about in this committee, on changing culture, on impacting not just highest level leadership, but on also reaching mid-level commanders, for example, and talking about chain of command authority, not just through formal processes, which is one important and extremely important way of addressing this and dealing with accountability, but talking about the responsibility of everyone in the forces. And I'll end before I turn to General Bourgon in saying that having Operation Honor and being able to talk as openly as we do in this committee and elsewhere about its flaws, about ways that it isn't delivering at the speed we all want it to deliver, is something that is inherently important for Canada to be able to do, because as I mentioned, we work with militaries around the world where the issue is not recognized, where there's adamant denial that it's a problem, and to be able to say that we have a series of issues that we continue to struggle with implementing to the most effective extent is something that's very important.
And my next question is for the general. Women in the Canadian Armed Forces who are victims of sexual assault and harassment are told to report these crimes. And while the male offenders are rarely punished, in many cases, they're allowed to freely continue serving right alongside their victims like nothing happened. And meanwhile, the female accusers are denied advancement, transferred posts, or discharged from the military altogether. So it's no wonder the female recruitment has barely budged despite the efforts to increase the numbers. So how can we boost female recruitment when the hostile work environment is clearly reinforced by the chain
I'm
of
afraid I'm
command?
going to have to decline the opportunity for the witness to answer. We're up over 8 minutes now, so I'll have to pass the baton for questions to Mr. Spangler. Thank you.
Madam Chair, thank you very much, Ambassador O'Neill and Lieutenant General, Brigadier General Bougon. Thank you both for being with us. Thank you for your service in your important roles, and thank you for your testimony today. Ambassador O'Neill, you mentioned in the beginning that we're days away from the anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325. It's a 20-year anniversary of an incredibly significant instrument that's changed the landscape in many, many ways. I'm wondering if you could expand a bit on your introductory remarks and tell Canadians why this resolution is important, and also speak a bit about your personal objectives, your aspirations, your vision for what's ahead under this resolution and everything that's connected to it.
Thanks so much for the question. So Resolution 1325, as I know the committee knows well, but as you mentioned, not all Canadians know as well, is the first time that the highest security focused body in the world, the UN Security Council, said that women are not only victims of conflict, but they are also powerful agents of change. And it said that they have to be included in all processes, all formal processes, to prevent and end and rebuild after violent conflict. The stat I often share is that it's the Security Council resolution that is most translated into other languages of any single other one, which I think speaks to its relevance. And I've seen over 20 years, women in communities around the world use it as a tool to hold their own governments accountable, saying, even though you've said you will do this, we're not seeing action. So you mentioned some milestones and some things that are going well. We right now, as I mentioned, we have 85 countries that have national action plans. Some of them admittedly are very weak, but they are all a tool around which citizens and people living within, and around living with war around the world have been able to organize and been able to say this is something that the international community has said is our right. So we're seeing a lot of policies, an increasing number of policies. We're also seeing a lot of data and research emerge. So when we first saw the resolution emerge 20 years ago, when Canada was last on the Security Council, we didn't even know the state of numbers. And I think you would all have been terrified by the lack, or by the methodology used to document it. But researchers looking at signed peace agreements, at the number of women in photos, et cetera, to figure out that there were, in fact, the number of proportion of women who were mediators was 2%. 4% of people who signed peace agreement were women. And yet they're dealing with issues and agreements as it relates to security as well that affect the entire population. So we've seen a lot of progress in that way. You mentioned what are next steps and what are vision. I mean, we're still looking to close some of the big gaps in this space. So there's a strong ambition that was set out by the agreement, and there are still significant areas where we don't see it consistently applied. A lot of that relates to the work of women in communities, so being recognized, getting funding, getting access to decision making, being protected. And so looking to close some of those gaps increasingly. And my hope is that over time, we'll see a complete shift in burden from having to start many events and meetings, as we do often now, from justifying the value of inclusion and talking about the contributions women make, to people having to justify and defend exclusion.
Right.
We'll get to a much more nuanced consideration of gender, and I think we'll get a lot more integration into education and training that Brigadier General Bougon mentioned earlier, so that we will have more and more people sort of coming up the system who are familiarized with these ideas much earlier on.
Thank you so much. Ambassador O'Neill, let me take you to a slightly more specific question. Last Friday, I had a chance to join a webinar by the Challenges Forum, an organization that's focused on peacekeeping practices. And the title was Improving Peacekeeping Effectiveness by Increasing the Diversity of Mission Composition, very specifically focused at the UN work that Canadians participate in the field. And we've had some key examples. For example, Carolyn McCaskey, who led the Burundi mission in 2004, ONUB, and was involved in ceasefire negotiations, and also now Deborah Lyons, who's the former ambassador for Canada and the SRSG at UNAMA. Why is it so important at the level of peace operations and UN integrated and complex missions to have this diversity and to have a much greater number of women, not only in the missions, but at the leadership level?
Thanks, great question. And I'll speak to, you mentioned security forces as well as being a key part of the mission. And when this question comes up, why is it important? You know, I think we've seen from data from the private sector, from industry, from elsewhere, that diversity leads to better decision making. And there's no difference as it relates to peace and security. We also see that people in communities need to increase their trust of institutions, and they're more likely to do that when they see that they are reflective of broader community. When it relates to women in security forces in particular, and why do we have this focus on women peacekeepers? It's for a range of reasons. The primary one, though, being that they can do the job. You know, we need the most talented people. Women are half the population, so why would we limit ourselves from choosing them? And there's no evidence that women are any less capable of doing that. There's evidence and increasing data about women in security forces, increasing their operational effectiveness, you know, having a broader perspective on the community, being able to gather broader situational awareness, making sure they have women access to women and men as well. And I just want to end by saying, you know, perhaps you can discern a little bit from my tone and response here that I am both committed to being thoughtful in answering that question, and I'm a bit reflective of the frustration that many women in forces in particular have shared with me about the challenge or continuous burden of having to justify their existence. And many have said, you know, when was the last time we started an event with a theme of discussion saying, why do we need men in security forces, or what value, particular added value, does a different population bring? So just recognizing that it can be easy to be reductive in saying women will be more likely to work with women and children in the community, to have sexual violence reported to them, to get access to different groups. The bottom line is they can do the job, and they increase the capabilities in additional ranges that are recognized.
Ambassador, thank you so much. I think that's my time, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stangeman. And maintenant, j'invite Monsieur Brunel-Duceppe.
We'll now go to Mr. Brunel-Duceppe. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. O'Neill, and thank you to General Bourgon. Thank you for being with us today. We appreciate that. I've got a question for both of you, but perhaps General Bourgon will be in a better position to answer it, but you can let me know. Canada has an action plan for women, peace and security, and the government has committed to recruiting more women into the CAF. We have an objective of 25%. Currently, the numbers show, 15.9% as of the last numbers I have. So my question is this. The pandemic has hit Canada, Quebec. Have those numbers changed? Has the pandemic changed those numbers in any way? Is recruitment still underway, or are we going to be seeing a delay in that objective because of the pandemic, a delay in the recruitment of women? I'll start. We're at 16.1%. That's the good news I have for you. So we are continuing with recruitment, continuing to recruit women. Clearly, COVID has had an impact on recruitment generally in all sectors. But we continue to work very hard, and the forces in our strategy acknowledge the importance of women and minority groups, and we have a recruitment strategy. It is working. Over the past 2 years, we've put a number of initiatives in place. Perhaps you've heard about them. The name of the program in English is Women in the Forces. So that's a program that women have an opportunity to try out because there are a lot of unknowns. So it gives women an opportunity to take a look at what life is like in the forces, to talk to women who are in the Canadian Armed Forces, to see if it's for them. And the results were very positive. 25% of women who participated in the Women in the Forces program stayed on. So that's an excellent program. We're looking at getting it up and running again once the situation calms down a bit, if I can put it that way. When we look at other initiatives, we are prioritizing, and we're also revolutionizing our recruitment system. If you have an opportunity to check out our new website, you'll be able to see that it's completely redone with the new generation. And so there is a 12% increase in traffic on our website. So that's exceptional as well. So we are prioritizing matters. And if we want to recruit 25%, we do need to look at the situation so that we can meet the objectives that we've set. We've got a number of focus groups talking to Canadians, asking them what attracts them to the Canadian Forces, what they like less. And Mr. Duceppe, well, that's where I was going, because I'm talking about the development of recruitment and expertise in the area. Now, you've talked about some focus groups. I have a question about that. What are the obstacles that you've identified? What is preventing women from joining the forces in greater numbers? Have you identified or targeted some obstacles? The general. Well, the focus groups have told us that there is a difference between, or have been expressed in a difference between men and women. First of all, the women are more attracted to the forces, but not in the infantry or in a combat role, but more for the humanitarian assistance, security in those roles. In Afghanistan, there were more men. That didn't attract as many women. But in the medical side, yes, but we're focusing on STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, because there are a lot of women who are combat engineers. And one of the other points that was important to note is that women are troubled by the issue of trying to balance work and the home. Now, in my case, I'm married and I have 2 children. We have a work-life balance. It is possible to have an exceptional career in the forces. There's also the issue of stability. Women are often very concerned about moving more so than men. And the final factor is one that we're working on, is the environmental culture. The reports in the media aren't really helping us in that regard, but people have confidence in the chain of command, but it doesn't look good in cases, and so that's an issue that we also need to work on. With respect to Operation Honor, we need to focus on the positive side. And I'll go quickly because I just have a couple of minutes left, I'm sure, but I do have some more questions. Do you have any specific figures when it comes to the efforts undertaken to recruit Francophone women in Quebec? Do you have any figures in that area? Answer, no, I'm sorry, I don't have the detail broken down. I have data for overall numbers of women, but over the past year, we've recruited 20% women. So there's 2,049 women who've joined the Canadian Armed Forces. It's a 19% increase over the previous year. So that is excellent. When we look at statistics with the Royal Military College in Saint-Jean and the college in Kingston, 23.4% of the officer recruits are women. Mr. Brunel-Duceppe. So one quick question, if I may. One last no? Okay. All right then. Well, thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Madame McPherson.
You can hear me. And thank you very, very much for both Brigadier General Bongdon and Miss O'Neill for joining us today. This is great, and I'm just absolutely delighted that I get to participate on the committee today. I had some questions actually to start with. I'm going to ask a few questions of Miss O'Neill, if I could. I know that you are mandated to provide advice to a number of ministries. There is, the Crown Indigenous, the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, a number of them. The ones I'm in particular interested in are the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of International Development. Could you talk a little bit about how the WPS agenda is being integrated into those departments, how you're being consulted and being able to provide feedback to that? And then as a sort of sub-question to that, if you could talk a little bit about how you would see a feminist foreign policy going forward and what that might look like in terms of incorporating a GBA plus analysis across the ministries that you are mandated to provide advice to.
Thank you for that question. Your first one relates to how it's integrated across the department, the now consolidated Department of Global Affairs Canada. So the North Star essentially is our National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. And when I started the role, I spent several months speaking with people across that department as well as various others at all lengths, locally engaged staff to ambassadors, deputy ministers, et cetera, and said, what do you need? First of all, do you know about it? What do you need to implement more, et cetera? And there was an overwhelming consensus that we have the policy framework that we need. We need implementation of it. We need implementation to be more consistent so that we are implementing it when crises emerge. It's a little more reflexive than perhaps it might be now. And so in terms of the way that I'm integrated, my office itself is based at Global Affairs, and there's 4 staff, including myself. I'm very fortunate, as I mentioned, to have 2 secondees from DND and from the CAF, as well as a range of people that I work with across different offices. So while it's both an advantage and a challenge to be, as I describe myself, sometimes a kind of floating box in an org chart, it also presents a lot of opportunities to engage ourselves in different areas. So I work with the regional bureaus as well as thematic bureaus to talk about what is the extent of our implementation and how does it, what gaps are still needed. Your question related to feminist foreign policy. So the government has spoken to it to date as being comprised, our feminist foreign policy being comprised of various components. Women, peace and security and our action plan being one of them. Our feminist international assistance policy being another. Strong, secure, and engaged being a third, and then our trade policy being a fourth. And so those being kind of pillars of the feminist foreign policy. And while I recognize that, and while talking about it around the world and at home, I recognize that feminist is often a very loaded word, especially when you associate it with security and defense issues. But I find that almost without exception, when you unpack the concept, it's something that the vast majority of Canadians agree with. And the way that I think about it, and I think the way that the government articulates it and implements it, is by recognizing that every single person has equal rights and an equal opportunity, should have an equal opportunity to access those rights, and that we are all better off when that happens. And so it is looking at power structures, not just equality, but power. And so you mentioned how GBA Plus fits into that. Gender-based analysis plus is a tool of analysis. It's a process through which we can identify how an issue might differently affect men or women or boys or girls or people who are, in urban settings or rural settings or with disabilities or other. It's only a tool for understanding. So an approach of women, peace, and security, or feminist foreign policy, is a sort of positive determination to create more equality and reduce the inequality that is identified through that analysis. So part of the issue, I think, is making sure that we do strong gender-based analysis plus, and then we do something with that information.
Of course, that's the big issue, isn't it? Is making sure that you do something with that information. And I guess maybe that will lead me on to my next question for you as well. And that is, knowing that you have articulated some of those areas where we have had gains, and some of those areas where we have been able to do some good work in terms of our WPS agenda. What are the, if you had your druthers, what are the areas that you would like us to focus, to put our primary effort towards right now?
Thank you. So I'd say a few things. I've got a lot of druthers. One would be to just get people aware of what the principle is. So I think there are still a lot of misconceptions that women, peace, and security is about saying women are inherently more peaceful than men or better than men at some things, or that to have women, we're going to be disadvantaging men in some way. So just the idea we're talking about reducing barriers to having equal opportunity, and that women in particular in areas of peace and security face a disproportionate amount of barriers. So one, just recognition of what the issue itself is, and shedding some of the stereotypes, I guess, with it. The other thing I'd say is a lot more customized tools. So the vast majority of people across the departments that I work in really want to contribute to gender equality. And yet we're asking them to do more and more kind of specific and technical tasks. So how do you fully integrate gender-based analysis plus into procurement processes for the Department of National Defense? What does a military advisor, gender advisor need to do? How do you advise your embassy about successful models of inclusion in a national dialogue process? How do you protect women human rights defender? What's the data and research out there, as we were just talking about, what's actually working? So I think if I had a tool, I'd give people a lot more customized guidance for their day-to-day job, because we talk about a little bit about GBA plus, people are introduced to Security Council Resolution 1325 and their big concepts.
Thank you very much. Excellent questions and excellent answers. Mr. Dowdle.
Good morning, Madam Chair. And first and foremost, I just want to say it's fantastic to be back. We haven't had too many committee meetings since I celebrated my year anniversary just a few days ago. So I'm extremely excited to be here today. And I just want to thank as well Ambassador O'Neill and Brigadier General Burnell for being here today and shedding light on this important subject that we have here today. I'd just like to follow up. I heard a great question in the earlier round, and I know my honorable colleague from Renfrew, Nipissing, and Pembroke had a fantastic question, and I think I would like to bring it forward as well, just to hear what the response is. I'd like to hear from both presenters today. So basically, what it is the women in the armed force who are victims of sexual assault and harassment are told to report these crimes, and while the male offenders are rarely punished, in many cases, they are actually allowed to freely continue serving right alongside their victims like nothing has happened. The female accusers are denied advancement, transferred post, or discharged from the military altogether. It's no wonder that female recruitment has barely budged despite the efforts to increase their members. How can we actually boost female recruitment when the hostile work environment is clearly reinforced by the chain of command?
Sorry, am I unmuted? I don't think it's clearly reinforced by the chain of command. I think there are some instances that are exceptionally disturbing and troubling. And I am as concerned as you are about the fact that this still exists. And I think about that from a range of perspectives, including the fact that we're constantly working on how to increase the number of women in these forces, and what does it mean to be encouraging young women, young Canadians to join forces who are not confident in the process. So whenever faced with that question, I think the most important thing that we can do is paint the full picture. So as Brigadier General Bourgon was talking about, not sweeping under the rug the fact that this happens, as it does, and as we know it does, and as we are increasingly recording, documenting that it does, but talking about what processes are in place, how we're dealing with this systemically, identifying areas where we're still struggling and dealing with it systemically, and being exceptionally clear about what the position of leadership is on this. And I think, again, that's an area where we have had a lot of clarity. And I think it would be both irresponsible, reckless, disrespectful to young Canadian women to not be dealing with it seriously, not taking it as the crisis that I think it is, or it has been dealt like it is. But I also think we have seen a lot of positive signals, and we have to continue to focus on them.
And I will add that, you know, the well-being of our members is the most important thing in the CAF. And since Up Honor was instated, 134 people have been released from the military. 134 have been dealt with because of what they did. So every time someone comes forward, women or a man, it is investigated. It is looked at from A to Z. Of course, the victims is separated from the perpetrator because we don't want them to be in the same environment. However, it's looked at. There is an investigation, and justice has been served. I mean, 134 people have been released. There's been a lot of administrative measures put in place also. So we are dealing with the situation.
Thank you. And my next question is, I think all of us here at the table are proud of the fact that we're looking at ways to improve the situation that we have to get more women involved in our peacekeeping initiatives. The question I kind of have, it relates, I guess, maybe towards the where we're headed and where we're going. The Georgetown Institute of Women, Peace and Security ranked Canada 11th amongst 167 countries on its 2019 Women, Peace and Security Index, and then a decrease from 7th the year before, which was 2018. So a couple questions, I guess, relating to that. What areas can Canada do to focus to strengthen it? And I guess the other question I have is, I know as a key supporter of the agenda, we've invested the largest portion, I guess, of money, over 17 million to the fund. I'm just wondering what kind of dollars other countries invested, and whether or not you see in the future, because of COVID, whether there'll be more difficulties to get people investing into this really important agenda that we're working on here today.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. So your first question about what else Canada can do to continue to strengthen its work. There are two things that have been in place recently and that we're still experiencing, I'd say, the benefits from, or getting increasing benefits from, related to our National Action Plan. And then I'll speak to the LC Initiative Fund, which is, I think, the one you're referring to. So we now have 9 implementing partners of the fund, or of the National Action Plan. So when our first one was released in 2011, we had 3. When the second one was released in 2017, we had 7. And we now have added Indigenous Services Canada and Crown Indigenous and Northern Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. And that is something that I talk about, and that our department and our diplomats talk about around the world, because it's a reflection of the fact that we are not saying we are perfect at home and you abroad need to do the following things to be as good as we are. The fact that we have so many departments and several departments with that are domestically focused says we view this as an issue that affects us both domestically and internationally. The second big thing I'd say that we are doing well on, and that we can always continue to strengthen on.
And unfortunately, otherwise, not everyone will get their turn to ask you a question, and that would not be good. Mr. Baker.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Ambassador O'Neill and Brigadier General Bourgon, for being with us today. I think this is a very important discussion, and I'm grateful to both of you for spending the time to be here with us here today. My question is a little more high level, and I'd like to direct it to both of you, if I may. How do you measure success in your mandate? And because we've talked about a lot of things in this conversation, I thought there's much more that we could talk about. But if I had to convey to my constituents in my community in Etobicoke, what it is that you do and what success looks like for both of your roles. So how would you describe success? How do you measure success? And how would you say you're progressing towards that success?
Sure, I'll try to be quicker this time. So at the highest level, I'd say we're trying to progress to a point where half of the population doesn't have to explain why it belongs in certain conversations. We're trying to get to a point where everybody has at least the option to participate in making decisions about their own future. That includes women, girls, Indigenous women, LGBTQ2S people. Everybody has the option to have decisions about their own lives not made for them by people who don't necessarily understand their priorities. That's the biggest picture sense that I say. And when it comes to peace and security, we know that it's a traditionally male-dominated space, and many people don't think that women belong in the military and police forces around the table for negotiation. But if we're looking at ending a conflict by bringing together only the people who started that conflict or who fought in that conflict in the first place, how are we setting a condition for the longer term? I'll stop there for once. Go to Brigadier General Bull.
For me, success is having more women deployed on operation. I mean, the more we can increase the quantity of women that we have on deployed ops, that means that we have a pool at home that is available, trained, and qualified. So that is success. The leadership, we've had General Carignan as the lead, the commander for the NATO mission in Iraq, as a two-star leading a NATO coalition. That is success. She is making a difference out there. She's representing Canada's values and our diversity and inclusion. So a big one. Another one is when we're doing the planning and the execution of operation, we have a tool now. It's integrating a gender perspective into operation. So we're looking at everything we do from plans, intelligence, execution, and looking at the environment and the needs on the ground. Well, I want the men out there to think differently, to put that diversity lens, that GBA lens, those glasses, so that they can see the world more in a human security, less black and white. And when I say lens, those lenses are not pink. Okay, the glasses represent all the plus of the GBA. They're multicolor. So that is for me is success when we'll have more men, because we need men out there to be our allies. It's super important. This is not women, peace and security is not a women issue. It's an all of us issue.
Thank you both for that. I think I have about a minute and a half left. And so in that minute and a half, maybe I'll turn it to Ambassador O'Neill, if I could ask you this question, which is, what are the greatest obstacles to achieving those measures of success that we've just talked about, or at least the measures of success that you're concerned about? What are the greatest obstacles, and what can we do to overcome them?
Sorry, very short question there. Culture is a big one, traditional expectations and traditional roles. That said, times of conflict tend to be highly disruptive, and we see that a lot of progression and kind of leaps forward can be made in times of conflict, as a lot of reordering is going on and rethinking of different people's roles. Another thing is people trying to cling to power. So a lot of people use the excuse, I think, of culture. It's not culturally appropriate in some places for women to be involved in something or other. Usually that's just a cover by people who want to hold on to their own power, who are being afraid of their own constituents actually holding them accountable. So those are two big ones. And I'll leave it in case Ambassador or General Bougon has a sec to intervene on her portfolio specifically.
I think, as you said, Jackie, is the cultural. Still in Canada today, women have those gender roles and those cultural identities. And quite often they think that they can't join the CAF, and it's so wrong. I mean, I'm 125, 5'3", and I was a helicopter pilot. So if I could have done it, everyone can do it. And that's what we need to change, is that culture.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Monsieur Brunet-Duceppe.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Juste pour terminer la petite conversation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to go back to the conversation earlier. I didn't get my last question in. Now, we talked about the pandemic affecting recruitment, not just women, but recruitment generally. General Bourgon, you're confident. You've given me some good numbers, but you're confident that we'll hit the 25% by the deadline? The General, it'll be difficult. We're facing challenges in front of us. There are barriers and obstacles. They're cultural in nature. It's important to convince women and minority groups to join the CAF because it's a wonderful organization. Yes, we have some work to do. Yes, we do have work to do, but we are working very hard on those issues. So we need to help change society, for example. And as I mentioned, STEM, we need to have women looking beyond the traditional areas. It will be difficult, though. Thank you. Ms. O'Neill, Ambassador O'Neill. Thank you, General Bourgon. I'd like to go to Ambassador O'Neill. There were 200 soldiers that participated in 2017, a rapid response force. It was with the UN. But when we look at the commitments when it comes to peacekeeping missions and the strategy, the women, peace and security strategy, are you considering the putting into place of a strategic force? Answer. Discussion is ongoing surrounding the role and culture, how we can train gender advisors, for example, as General Bourgon referred to. But I could have asked her to elaborate on that preparation. The General. Yes, and we're also working with the UN on the concept of a joint force. They have a battalion, a quick response battalion. By 2021, they're looking to have 50% women on their mixed engagement team. And that's a concept that we're working on with the UN to look at what they'll be called upon to do, what their taskings will be, what training and equipment they'll need, because that's important. We need to have men and women on the ground who are qualified, trained with the equipment they need and able to respond to all situations. So that's something the CAF is working on with the UN in terms of analysis for the training and equipment. Question. So in your discussions then, thank you.
For Alexis, I keep cutting him off. So thank you very much again for all of these answers. This is fascinating, and I would love to go for coffee and have lots of time to ask you all sorts of questions. I'll try to be brief. I just thought I would start by giving Ambassador O'Neill an opportunity to share her last piece. We cut her off on her answer last time. If you wanted to just share your last piece, and then I have a few questions for the Brigadier General, if that's possible.
Sure, thank you, and I appreciate that. I'll be quick. The member had asked about our contributions and our work around the ELSI initiative for women in peace operations, which has numerous parts. One of the parts is an international fund. It's called the ELSI Initiative Fund. It was set up last year. To the member's question, it's raised now in total about $21 million so far. We have contributions from Australia, Finland, Germany, Netherlands, UK. As you correctly mentioned, that Canada's contributed in total about 17.5 million Canadian. And the idea of it is to encourage countries in particular to address the barriers, we were talking earlier about barriers, that women face in either being recruited, being retained, moving up the ranks, getting deployed to UN peace operations, having reasonable and positive experiences on those operations, and coming back for more deployment. So looking at the whole spectrum. So it covers a range of things through that fund, and we've been growing and adding partners to the fund, as well as the work overall, which includes various other components.
And 17.5 million seems like a incredibly small amount to be contributing to that, but I won't ask you to comment on that at this point. So I'd actually like to ask the Brigadier General a few questions in terms of recruitment and how we're managing that. And I did really appreciate your comments that you made about this not being a women's issue, that this is something that needs to incorporate men in this conversation. I also wondered about some of our recruitment in terms of Indigenous recruitment. Can you talk a little bit about any initiatives that have been undertaken to recruit Indigenous women to the CAF?
I'm sorry, this one is outside a little bit of my field, but I'm sure that we can take this question for notice. I know that there is some initiatives that are targeted towards our Indigenous community, and it's working also. But I cannot give you any specific. I apologize.
And I would love to get any further information that you had on that for the future. And I did just want to follow up a little bit on one of the questions that Mike. Oh, sorry, is my time up?
I know it's going very quickly, but Mr. Benson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ambassador O'Neill and Brigadier General Bourgault. Mrs. O'Neill, Canada has failed to act on its pledge to provide 600 peacekeepers for UN missions. In fact, since February of 2020, the number of Canadian troops has fallen to 0. Does that make it more difficult for Canada to advocate for women to participate in peacekeeping globally when we're not leading by example?
So the number is not 0, and I know Brigadier General Bourgault can elaborate on that. There are a lot of ways different ways to assess our contribution. So we're the 9th largest financial contributor to the peacekeeping budget based on assessed contributions. And what I can speak to most directly is our reputation as it relates to the idea of inclusion and promoting women within forces. And we have a very strong reputation at the UN for that, in part through this LC initiative, where we're saying to countries not only send more women, but what does the entire system need to do so? But we're also really focusing on targeting and talking to women. There's a lot of conversation around the UN about women peacekeepers and very little conversation to women peacekeepers. And Canada has been very clearly, especially in the last few years, identified as really leading that and not just talking about this as an object of UN policy, but engaging people in developing it. So I do see that we actually have quite a positive reputation in many, many ways at the UN. Brigadier General will go correct.
But can I just say that having the boots on the ground in the country, developing the relationships with the people on the ground, creating those relationships, especially the female to female relationships, talking to the children, isn't that important? And shouldn't we be striving to make sure that we're there on the ground?
We have a lot of relationships with countries that are doing that work. So as part of this LC initiative, for example, we're working very closely with Zambia and with Ghana, who are among the biggest troop contributing and police contributing countries that contribute to the UN. And we're talking with them about their systems, what we've learned, what they've learned, how we can all do better. So we're certainly not detached from those conversations at all. I understand there's no substitute for being on the ground. We're also accessing that in different ways. So it's not something that we are not having as an input at all. Brigadier General, we'll go into
Well, yeah, I just want to add that we do have 29 Canadian Armed Forces deployed on UN mission right now. So in South Sudan and Mali. We also have an episodic Hercules aircraft that goes down in Africa every 6 months for about a month that provides airlift to the United Nations as part as our Vancouver principle and our pledge. So we do have Canadian soldiers, and there's also RCMPs that are deployed today on UN operation.
Okay. Earlier, we heard that in the Georgetown WPS index, that Canada had slipped from 7th or 9th down to 11th. I'm just curious on your thoughts on why we slipped down in the rankings. I'm sure we don't want to be slipping any further, and what your thoughts are on how we can go back up the rankings and get back to 7th or 9th or wherever we were, and maybe even go above that. Do you have some ideas on how we can move back up the line?
Thanks for the question. I used to work at Georgetown and with that institute very directly and contributed to help create it. And I haven't read the latest one in enough detail to tell you why we decreased those few spots. What I can tell you is that it is a limited ranking, as most rankings are. It doesn't, I think the last time I checked, include things including related to women in the security forces. So I'll have to go through and identify exactly why that was, but with any ranking of that nature, I take it as an indication, but not something of concern if we're still talking about movement of a few spots in the top range.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
You've got 30. You've got 20 seconds, Mr. Benson.
Well, maybe you can just give us some thoughts then on some of the other countries that are at the top of that list, countries like Norway and Iceland. Can you give us any thoughts on something that they're doing that Canada could learn from and maybe duplicate?
There's something that is being practiced by leaders around the world, and we are doing in many different ways, and I mentioned can do more of, is systematic engagement of civil society organizations in policy making. So for the first time, our National Action Plan, for example, now has civil society that co-chairs the advisory committee. That was something that we did for the first time, having learned from other places about that role, so that civil society has regular meetings and a consistent way of engaging and holding us accountable.
Okay. Thank you.
Monsieur Robillard.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Mr. Robillard. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Ms. O'Neill, for Ambassador O'Neill. I may have to answer it in English, but at any rate, please proceed. Thank you for being here today, Ambassador O'Neill. My question deals with the inclusion of women in the Canadian Forces. With your experience, based on the involvement of women in security issues, what states are doing the best in this area? What nations? Thank you for the question, and I'll answer you in English.
So let me speak broadly. I'll start with the United Nations. There are about 82,000 uniformed personnel right now across 22 peace operations. Within the military forces, women are comprised about 5 to 6%. Police, about 15%. And we noted earlier the UN has a target as well, just as we do. The target for women serving in military contingents by 2028 is 15% for contingents and 25% for military observers and staff officers. So, and Brigadier General Bourgon can speak to Canada meeting those commitments. In terms of your question about other militaries, just to give you a perspective, in NATO, women comprise about 11% of the military ranks of NATO countries. Keep in mind, Canada's 16, Brigadier General just said, but they represent only about 7% of forces active in NATO operations and missions, and they're very significantly underrepresented in decision-making positions. And I'll end by very briefly saying that all of these figures are very hard to come by. I have a dream that we will someday have a placemat like the International Parliamentary Union has that shows the proportion and rank, level of women in security forces around the world. But there are many countries, China, for example, who don't disclose that, saying it speaks to national security issues. There are a lot of countries who aren't regularly reporting, even through NATO, what their force levels are, the proportion of women within them. So we can speak to some of it. Canada is in the exceeding some, not exceeding others, but we still have a lack of information. And that's part of what this resolution 1325 and other focus on this issue has enabled us to do, is actually ask the question and find out where we stand currently.
Selon vous, quelles sont les raisons qui...
What explains this success, and what steps should Canada take in order to make progress in this area?
Alors, je veux répondre au sujet des mesures qui...
Well, measures. Well, I could address the first part of the question, then the Brigadier General can address the other component. Other countries have adopted a recruitment process.
Asking women what they wanted to do as interests. So working previously, for example, with the US military, with women who are deployed on international operations, we looked at recruiting processes. They showed pictures of people with AK-47s jumping out of helicopters to go serve as UN police officers. UN police officers, first of all, aren't armed. They're not typically jumping out of helicopters. And when we did focus groups, we learned things like women were interested in having a career-enhancing experience. They were interested in working with communities. They were interested in experiencing governance in other countries. So the most successful ones are the ones who customized recruitment processes in a targeted way. Some of them also have mandatory service as well, of course.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you. Initially, we focused on integrating women into the CAF. And now we're focusing on inclusivity, and there's a difference between integration and inclusivity. By inclusivity, I mean we are listening to the needs of women. Women have strengths, weaknesses. We're focusing on this, we're listening to that, and we're including all of that into the process, into the decision-making process. I'd say there isn't a difference between men and women in the Canadian Forces.
Also don't allow women to serve in combat roles. So the fact that we do enable it has put us on a different path that I think will ultimately lead us to be more successful.
For that, to Mr. Bazan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the Ambassador and the General for joining us today and sharing with us the issues that we're dealing with on making sure that women are able to enjoy a fulsome career within the Canadian Armed Forces. Now, Brigadier General Bourgon, you had mentioned that there had already been 134 members of the Canadian Armed Forces who have been released because of sexual misconduct and the role of Operation Honor. Can you tell me whether or not those were discharged honorably or dishonorably?
I do not have that that answer to that question. Sorry.
Would you be able to get it to us?
Of course.
Okay, thank you, General. And also, I'm been somewhat concerned for some time now that the military justice system is somewhat backlogged and at a stalemate because military judges are not hearing any cases, and of course, the Jordan principle comes into play, where justice delayed is justice denied. So I'm wondering how many cases revolve around sexual misconduct, and that we have members of the armed forces who have their charges dropped because they haven't been processed through the military justice system in an expedient amount of time. And I'm curious as to what those numbers are, and then ultimately, how is that impacting on the morale of female members of the Canadian Armed Forces?
Well, like I said, I don't have the statistics, and again, the justice is not my field, but I'm sure that we can have those information for you. But at the end of the day, we take measures from the get-go. We listen to the victims. We ensure that there's separation between the preparators and the victims. We follow the victims are the most important person. So the chain of command, the support network is there around him or her in those difficult times. The sexual misconduct response center is there also available 24/7 for the victims, but more than that, for the chain of command also to support our cast members.
I appreciate that, General. Although I think at the same time we still have a problem is that the Jordan Principle is allowing people that have been charged with sexual assault to be released, and so how is that justice for the victim? Even with the supports, they're not seeing justice at the end of the day. So the statistics there, I think, is going to be interesting. Ambassador O'Neill, and I know you and I have talked about this in the past, but participation of women in the Canadian Armed Forces is key. Advancement in the armed forces is something that we all want to see happen for women in uniform. What changes can we make that is best practices from other countries and other armed forces around the world can we employ in the CAF to ensure that we have opportunities and fulsome careers for women in uniform?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for championing this and keeping it on all of our radars. So there's something that I think is a really positive thing. I mentioned the LC initiative for women in peace operations. Through that, we're trying to work with countries around the world. We did something, we developed what's called a barrier assessment methodology. So we talked to peacekeepers, people in police and military forces around the world, got a whole range of ideas of what types of barriers they face. Things from their family not wanting them to join the forces, stigma of joining the forces. Often people are called, you know, they're loose or they couldn't do something else. To equipment challenges once they're in the forces. Are there helmets? Is there gear that fits them? Are they missing out on deployment opportunities because they often happen at a point in your career where women in particular are having young children at home, don't want to go on deployment. They then end up getting kind of an added cycle of not experiencing opportunities that set them up for deployment. There's 14 barriers that are identified. They're basically universal. They're broad enough to be universal. And they include, of course, one of the barrier being sexual assault or sexual harassment within the forces. We have made that assessment or that barrier methodology public. Various countries are undergoing it, and the Canadian Armed Forces is going to undergo it as well. And perhaps Brigadier General Bourgon can speak to it, but I think it's an important thing in that we're saying we have a systematized way of addressing everything from external cultural issues to internal ways that job descriptions are written or that selection processes are done to figure out what those barriers are. And then we'll have some ways of comparing and contrasting and figuring out some solutions. Sorry to go on so long.
I'll ask Mr. Bagnall, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you both for being here for this very, very important topic. Ms. O'Neill, you made the important point right at the beginning, of course, that we all know that success increases with diversity. And so I just want to follow up on a question Mr. Spiegelman asked. In the peacekeeping, negotiating, moderating, etc., although the numbers are lower than they should be, can you give some successes of any women from around the world, not just Canada, a success story of how they've been successful in making peace, and if possible, the difference that the value added in that in some cases, if there was, that made it possible or made it better.
Thank you for the question. So the data that you referred to is the fact that we now know that peace agreements are at least 35% more likely to endure at least 15 years if women are meaningfully involved in their creation. Why is that? We have a lot of evidence of the fact that women tend to both change the process and influence the topic. So to give some examples, women in Northern Ireland in negotiations, they broadened the discussion so that it included things like whether or not there would be segregated education going forward. So are we going to replicate the conditions that led to the division of our society that got us to this place? Women in Darfur raised issues of food security. Women in Colombia raised issues of land ownership and an ability to inherit property and land, and for women to own land and run for public office. These are things that ultimately add to the addressing of root causes that brought a country to conflict in the first place. So just a few examples. I was did an event this morning with several women from Afghanistan, including women who are in Doha right now. So the government has 21 negotiators on the government side. Taliban has none. 4 of the 21 are women, and one of them was on today, and she was talking about the fact that women have to be spreading themselves across every single committee of those negotiations because they tend to be thought of as we need to put them in health or, you know, education or something related to a basic social service. And they're saying that we have to be involved in discussing anti-corruption. We have to be involved in discussing the reform of our bloated security sector, a whole range of issues. So it's primarily about broadening the agenda, not just to issues related to so-called women's issues.
Okay, thank you. And I have one other question, so you could go on at length, but it's just to tell us about, and it's sort of follow up from Mr. Benson and Mr. Bazan touched on this. Just in anything that goes under your mandate, success stories from other countries from around the world that the committee may not be aware of.
Sudan. So women in my previous job and now in the government, I've been able to work with women in Sudan who lived for almost 40 years under military dictatorship, a very oppressive and severe military dictatorship. They were flogged for wearing pants, for example. couldn't have meetings, couldn't organize. A year and a half ago, women were 70% of the people who took to the streets to demonstrate. Finally, they brought down a dictator. That revolution was, and I was there in December, people talk about it as a women's revolution, a youth revolution. 70% of the people on the street. You see media coverage about women joined these revolutions, they were leading those revolutions. They brought down a dictator, and they did not stop there. This is something that does not get nearly enough coverage, so I'll try not to go on for too long. But when the transition government was named, 11 members of the transitional government, there were 2 positions. Women had to fight for those positions, and they used arguments like we have Resolution 1325. 85 countries or 80 some in the world have national action plans. We need that too. And they actually successfully negotiated for a 40% quota for either gender, for women or for men, minimum 40% representation in the legislative council going forward. So for legislative elections, Sudan's national parliament going forward has a 40% quota in its constitution, which I think is the biggest one in the world. Amazing stories.
Is that good?
Time left?
You got 30 seconds, Mr. Bagnall.
Any other examples?
Well, absolutely. Colombia was the first place that had what they call the gender subcommission. So they had a model where they had various committees. They also had a gender subcommission that was half women representing the FARC, half women representing the government. And they went through every single item on the negotiating table. And one of the things they did, for example, was remove the idea that men with guns essentially could forgive other men with guns for crimes committed against women. They introduced the fact that there could not be, that sexual violence needed to be included in a ceasefire and was not something that could be kind of negotiated away in a peace agreement. So it's an issue of justice that along the type of things that we're talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Monsieur Brunel-Duceppe.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Mr. Brunel-Duceppe. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Earlier, I asked a question of the General Bourgon with respect to the numbers in my first round. Francophone women in recruitment, and you said you didn't have them. Is that possible for you to send that to the committee, that information? You asked the question, but I don't know if we're tracking that. Women, yes, but Francophone women, I'm not sure we have that information. Question. Well, if you could provide me with some information, that would be good. And we didn't finish the discussion on the rapid response force. You said there was a 50% on the ground. That was the objective. Is that the Canadian objective for those intervention forces, or was it the 25%? Answer. It's a UN concept with the new parity strategy for women in uniform. There's a mixed intervention team. Each mission will have one of these battalions, and those battalions will have the 50% makeup. So then we'll have no choice but to achieve the objective then, with that in place. Answer. Well, if we do deploy, yes, we will have to have 50%, 50%, yes. Question. Going back to the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, they ranked Canada 11th, as was mentioned. And that's a drop from 2018. We were 7th in that year. So what area should Canada focus on in order to do better when it comes to the women, peace and security component?
I mentioned I'll have to check the specific reasons why we shifted down a couple of notches on the Georgetown scale. But in terms of areas that we can strengthen, as I mentioned, I think a key thing will be getting more tools, developing more tools. So gender-based analysis plus is a very useful tool. We have it for a range of levels at I'd say basic capacity level. We need to step that up. And that's something that colleagues at the Georgetown University and in military and police forces and the UN are also really, really interested and engaged in. We spoke earlier about it's just a tool of analysis, so it's often a way in the door of saying, let's just find out what impact this policy might have. We're not telling you to do something or another. You retain complete autonomy. We just need to here's a way of finding better analysis. So it's more customized and specialized tools. But I do think we have in our National Action Plan a very strong policy framework. We just have to keep going on the process of implementing it and getting more people to implement it more consistently.
All right, thank you very much, Madame McPherson.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to follow up on what you were just sort of talking about a little bit, Ambassador, in terms of implementation and how we have that good policy piece in place. How do we as parliamentarians assist you in your role? What are the things that we can do to make sure that this remains a whole of government endeavor and is not left on your shoulders alone?
Thanks so much. You continue to have sessions like this one where you ask us about progress and you force us to name gaps and areas that we need to improve. You ask people who don't have this in the job title that aren't designated women, peace and security or gender specialists or advisors. So it's very, very helpful when questions go to commanders, when they go to deputy ministers, when they go to people overseeing all aspects of policy about how this work is integrated in the broader work. We talked about this being sometimes considered as a separate or an add-on issue. And I often talk about how we have adversaries around the world who don't see this as an add-on issue. You know, Boko Haram, 2/3 of their suicide bombers are women. ISIS, 1 out of 5 foreign fighters who left from North America or Europe to fight was a woman. 1 out of 5, they're targeting women. So we have to be viewing this as part of our strategic national capacity to engage in our broader goals, so to keep asking them, as well as to bring experts from other countries. It's an area where we're learning from each other. So to have representatives of forces and governments around the world that are achieving some success in some ways so that we can continue to learn from them. Also reading and reviewing and interrogating the very extensive progress reports that are submitted every year. So there are people across government who spend a lot of time providing a great amount of detail that is tabled every year. And so to lift that up and to go through that and to ask questions about it is very, very powerful.
Wonderful. And I think I'll take that exact same question as I have this privileged role of being one of the last questioners, of course. Can I also ask you, Brigadier General, what parliamentarians can do to help you in terms of CAF recruitment, in terms of the work that you're doing around this work?
Well, if you can represent an interest, that would be awesome. Also, looking at the leadership that Jackie O'Neill said, you are now everything you're doing. Now you realize that there's a GBA or a gender perspective into it. So when something comes across your desk, ask the question, what is that human security dimension? What is the question that I'm supposed to be asking? What makes a difference here? Allies, all of you on the screens, I consider now allies on this subject because you're in position, leadership, you are in position of making a huge difference by your interests, by your question, and by redirecting some of the projects that are coming towards you. And you're like, well, where's that GBA piece, where that human security, like this homework is not done, get it back. So leadership is super important.
Well, I'm honored to be considered an ally. Sorry, Madam Chair, how much time did you say I had left?
Done. It's Mr. Bizan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate getting a second round. Now, Ambassador O'Neill, you and I have talked about in the past about recruitment and the recruitment efforts that are being made by Canadian Armed Forces. Do you see the challenges that are out there and how we go about the technique in recruiting? Is it needing more advertising, need to have more women out in the recruitment offices? Is it going out and targeting women in communities so that we get more of that gender balance without having to disadvantage others that are interested in joining the Canadian Armed Forces?
Thank you. Great question. I'm going to turn to Brigadier General Boulgon because I don't know specifically the latest, as I said, of what is working and what's not. We're trying a wide range of things right now, and that's what you have to do to some degree. You have to go broad and see which things are working. Two things I'd say that I do know that we can always continue to emphasize is visibility of women leaders who are respected and performing at high levels is really important. So to continue emphasizing amazing leaders like Brigadier General Boulgon and others who are having fulfilling careers at senior levels and who are respected not because they are women, but because they're doing tremendous jobs and are women. The second thing is the way that other male leaders in the military talk about this issue. So people are extremely attentive to the way that male parliamentarians, the general, the minister talk about the issue of women, and I think it's really, we have seen so much commitment in a very serious way to talking about the fact that we need women not only to be employment equity targets or because we have to, but because it strengthens our forces. So I think a narrative about this being force capability. So
Unfortunately, interpretation isn't working right now. Do you want to give it another try? Oh, you think it's with Madame O'Neill? Okay, so maybe how much time do we have?
General to you anyway, so I'll just stop.
To take that question?
Yeah, I can take that question. Mr. Bazan, everything you said, we are trying. We are having specific events for women, looking at women's college, women events, changing our publicity. Everything we can do, we are doing. There's also, once they're in the military, we have to keep them in the military also. So from retention, we're looking at initiatives, how we can keep our people much longer. The leadership, because it's nice to be in the military, but you have to go through promotion board, the same chances as our male counterpart. And I'm happy to report that our performance measurement PR reports have changed. They will be changing next year, where we are going to go through a new form. And this new form has been reviewed through a GBA analysis. So the characteristics that are now being evaluated on our people are more balanced. So there are female characteristics being looked at, like inclusivity, empathy, listening skill, the same way as we can see the more masculine characteristics such as decisiveness and leadership. So it's a lot more balance going forward so that women will have as more chance, and it's really adapted. And I think women will do much better from that side too. So which is a really, really positive thing.
Okay, thank you. And I think I have about a minute left or so. And I would just ask, and I'm not sure whether Ambassador O'Neill's microphone is working yet, but I would just ask both of you, with Operation Honor, now as we've seen it evolve over time, what changes are we recommending to Op Honor to ensure that it is being effective and that female cadets and female members of the armed forces feel safe? And especially I'd be interested in Ambassador O'Neill's take on this as someone from the outside looking in.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
No, actually, it's still crackling.
Still garbled. Could you unplug your headset and then plug it back in? And sometimes that fixes it.
Working?
I think so.
Very sorry about this.
There we go.
The extent to which I advise on it relates to leadership. General Vance has said that he's right now notified about sexual assault within the military at the same speed at which he is notified of a missile strike. That's the level of attention that needs to continue to this. And that's from an outside view. If we don't have that clarity of leadership, it's not going to be enough. But if we don't have that, we're not going to get anywhere else.
Madame Vandenbeld.
Thank you very much. And I would just like to thank Ambassador O'Neill and General Bourgon for your incredible work on this. And absolutely, you can see all of us as allies in that. I want to direct my question to Ambassador O'Neill. Of course, we all know that this is the 20th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325 coming up this weekend. And I recall 20 years ago at this time, I was actually in Sarajevo working with OSCE. And there was a tremendous amount of celebration. As you'll recall, the war in the Balkans was was the first where war was considered, or rape was considered a war crime, and the women there were very, very important as part of the peace process, although not part of the formal Dayton Accord. Could you talk a little bit about the progress since then? There was such celebration at that time, and I know that it's been spotty internationally, it's been sporadic, some progress made, but in other areas, not as much. I would note that you, at the level of ambassador, an actual ambassador for peace and security, I think are one of the only ones in the world. The work that you're doing with your counterparts internationally, you mentioned learning from other countries. If you could elaborate a little bit on the progress over 20 years globally and how much we still need to do and how we're learning from one another.
Thank you. Can you all hear me all right? Just give a thumbs up. Thank you. Okay, so very briefly, because we have limited time, I'll say the progress has been primarily in terms of normative framework, so policy making, stating what our policies are. We have 10 UN Security Council resolutions. We have language about women, peace, and security in various mission mandates issued by the Security Council. NATO, the OSCE, the African Union, many now have official policies. NATO now, this year, with Canada's support, has for the first time a sexual exploitation and abuse policy. NATO, for the first time, has a policy on sexual exploitation and abuse. So stating what the values that need to be respected are and what the standard is. In terms of gaps or where we have left to go, it's still largely aspirational. So we want you to implement 1325. Here's why it is better. Your security force will be improved. Your peace process will be strengthened. There's almost no consequence financially or even almost reputationally if you don't do it. So we still have gaps in accountability. We haven't had as much focus on prevention as I think the drafters and some of the early advocates would have wanted. So that's a big one. And then I'm sorry, I'm blanking on what the last part of your question was.
Working internationally, how we're learning from one another and your counterparts internationally.
Yes, thank you. So there are only a handful of special envoys or representatives on women, peace, and security, but now there are roughly 20 or so ambassadors for women and girls or for gender, peace, and security related themes. We've now created a working group. We meet at once a quarter and figure out what are the biggest issues, what are the biggest threats, how do we mitigate those threats, who's trying to undermine what progress, either at the UN, at NATO, or anything elsewhere, and most specifically, what's working within our governments and departments that we can learn from and replicate.
Thank you.
I'd like to add something, if I may, on this one. The UN, like leadership and engagement, is a big piece too. The UN Women, Peace and Security, CHOD being all the chief of defense of all the country, was launched a couple of years ago, and now our chief of defense is the chair of that committee. And that committee is actually committed to a collaborative platform, working together, sharing experiences, lessons learned, best practices, so that everyone can work together towards success. There's 54, it grew from 14 countries to 54 now, and there's a whole bunch of invitation have been sent. So hopefully there'll be more, but this is a platform of super important men and women, the CHODs of every country, that are working together on the WPS with great initiatives.
Now, to note, there's one female chief of defense staff in the world. In Slovenia, there's one. And General Vance has brought together 54 men to talk about the importance of women's peace and security. It's really tremendous.
That's it?
That's it. I'm afraid. Well, thank you very much. I'll take this off. It's to our witnesses today. Merci pour votre présence aujourd'hui. C'était très...
Thank you for being here today. It was very instructive. We're very happy. And perhaps in the future we can continue this discussion.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
All right. Now we've saved some time for committee business. Approve our steering committee report. I hope everyone's had a chance to look at it. Why don't we could just do it with a show of hands, because I think it was developed with consensus and collaboratively. So what do we think? Can we move ahead with that, the steering committee report? Everyone okay? Anybody object? Oh, we got some thumbs up there. Okay, that sounds good. That one's easy. All right, that's all we have.
No, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Bazan.
I gave.
Can't hear you.
Madam Chair, I gave notice of motion on Friday. I'd like to deal with that motion right now. We're dealing with committee business. I'll just read it into the record that the committee take note that the government misled Parliament by tabling a document at this committee in February of 2019 that erroneously stated that Canada's Quick Reaction Force has been registered with the United Nations and that the government has publicly apologized. Therefore, the committee is of the opinion that the minister should issue a written apology to this committee, that the chair table this motion as a report in the House of Commons, that a copy of the relevant testimony be appended to the report, and that the testimony in question be stricken from the record of this committee. Just to go on with that, and I do appreciate the fact that the deputy minister has already tabled or has already sent to committee an apology, but just to go to the rules and procedures that govern us as Parliament, I refer to BOSC Gagnon 2017, and in Chapter 1, it reads, under responsible government and ministerial responsibility, it says the principle of individual ministerial responsibility holds that ministers are accountable not only for their own actions as department heads, but also for the actions of their subordinates. Individual ministerial responsibility provides the basis for accountability throughout the system. Virtually all departmental activity is carried out in the name of a minister who in turn is responsible to Parliament for those acts. Ministers exercise power and are constitutionally responsible for the provisions and conduct of government, and Parliament holds them personally responsible for it. So on that basis, I still expect an apology directly from the minister to this committee or to Parliament, and that in keeping in line with actions that we've taken in the past, Madam Chair, we have had to deal with false testimony in the past. We've had to remove it from reports and stricken it from the records. Now, because we're in a different session, I think that we at best can do is amend the actual report that has been tabled in the House on UN peacekeeping. So I ask that committee quickly accept this motion so that we can get on with getting the apology directly from Minister Champagne, and then ultimately ensuring that the report and our record it has been corrected.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bazan. I see Madame Vandenbeld. Anyone else? Okay, Madame Vandenbeld.
Yes, thank you very much, and certainly to Mr. Bazan, as a parliamentary secretary on behalf of the government, we are very sorry that the erroneous information was provided to the committee. As you've seen, there was a letter from the deputy minister to this committee, and it explains and apologizes for the erroneous information. As I mentioned in question period last week, it was an honest mistake. It was human error, and if there's a need that the minister were to speak on this, I'm sure that he would be happy to do that without need of a motion, and perhaps our chair could communicate that to the minister. But it was an unfortunate error, and we believe that we've corrected the record. And I would suggest that we wouldn't need to have a motion for the government to recognize and acknowledge that an error was made, and as we have done. If we need to do more, we could have a communication go to the minister, but I don't think that this motion is necessary. Thank you.
Shall I can put this to the committee. Oh, Mr. Bazan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it is necessary. This is about the integrity of our own committee, that we did reference this in our report, that this was presented as evidence. So we do need to have it stricken from the record. And it does call upon the minister, and I think this is important, that part of ministerial accountability is that they're the department head, not the deputy minister. They're the ones that need to apologize. So I do expect a written apology from the minister to this committee so that we can move forward and ensure that the reports that we're putting out there are accurately, statistically accurate, factually accurate, and people can trust the information that we're putting out from this committee.
Okay, I see Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Chair. So in this case, I think an honest mistake was made. I'm of the view that when people make a mistake, it's important that they take responsibility and do what's possible to remedy that mistake. And I think that's what's been done in this case. I think that's what MP Vandeveld has suggested and indicated. Mr. Bazan, when I have to be frank, I'm a little bit surprised you're putting forward this motion. I think when you were in government, there were many instances where people at the most senior levels would mislead Parliament, and in some cases deliberately. And I'll say a couple of examples.
Let's not go down that path, Yvonne.
No, but hey, I have the floor. When the Tories misled Parliament on G8 spending, when the Harper government erroneously used a quote from the Auditor General that was actually about a different government on a different issue to defend their approach on G8 spending. And when a minister eventually had to admit, only after a tremendous amount of pressure, that she had altered a CETA document, a recommendation from the civil service, when Parliament was misled about the cost of the F-35 fighter jets, and I could go on. In those cases, in most of those cases, the senior leadership of the government at the time, not only did they deliberately mislead Parliament and the public, but they did not take responsibility or apologize, and in most cases, it didn't take measures to remedy the problem. So I guess I'm asking you, Mr. Bazan, why are you proposing this motion in the case of an inadvertent mistake when you didn't call for this and your colleagues didn't call for this action when Parliament was actually intentionally misled?
Are there anyone else who wants to speak? No? Well, obviously, pardon me? Oh, Madame Gallant?
You're muted.
So the comments from the member opposite have nothing to do with what is prescient at this time. It's important for the record to show that we dealt with the information that we had at the time, and because of things we've had in this committee happen in the past where incorrect information was provided, we have now established a precedent of making sure errors that have been made, either intentionally or unintentionally, are corrected and noted. Thank you.
We good? No one else wants to speak? Okay. Well, it's quite clear that there is not agreement in the entire committee, so I will ask the clerk to take a recorded division.
Okay, Mr. Bagnall.
Opposed?
Mr. Baker.
Opposed.
Monsieur Robillard.
Opposed.
Mr. Svenjman.
Opposed.
Ms. Vandenbelt.
Opposed.
Mr. Benson.
I'm for this motion.
Mr. Bazan.
In favor.
Mr. Dowdle,
In favor.
Ms. Gallant,
In favor.
Monsieur Brunel Duceppe,
Je vote contre.
Ms. McPherson,
Opposed.
It's 7-4, 7 days.
Okay. I call the motion is denied. So, any further business for committee business? All right, I hereby adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.